This television series is about creative visions and respect for humanity.
Good evening, I'm Bob Rathburn, the Executive Director at SLOSS Furnaces National Historic Landmark. It's my pleasure tonight to talk to you about SLOSS Furnaces and its importance, not only as the national landmark that speaks to the iron and steel industry nationally and internationally, but the importance of SLOSS Furnaces here in Birmingham, Alabama, and how it helped to found this city.
I remember when I first walked into SLOSS, it was autumn, it was in October, and I thought it was one of the most incredible places I had ever seen. So when I came down here, I thought this is the first time I had actually seen an industrial plant, industrial site up close and personal, if you will. Well, people like Henry de Bardeleben and James Withers Sloss and Truman Aldrich, they knew that these materials were in these mountains, but they also knew that one way that was needed to get these materials out of the mountains was to lay tracks, bring in the railroad. SLOSS furnaces, like all the other industries around town, did not shut down at 5 o'clock. It was running 24 hours a day. So what if you have an emergency at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, you would get what was called shack rousers. And these men, these shack rousers, would come down to the quarters at 3 in the morning whenever there was an emergency, wake these guys up and say, hey, we need your help. If you needed something, you paid in clacker. And of course, why would you give your employees clacker to buy things with in the commissary? Well, that money would just infiltrate, recycle back into SLOSS. Now, when these Southern Italians came into Birmingham, like they did in the North and like they did in the Northeast, they worked in the mines. And when they also came into this area, they were treated about the same as African Americans were treated. They were considered, a lot of them, second-class citizens, and they worked alongside the blacks in the mines, and they grew to become more comfortable with these African American miners. In fact, their community was right next door to the African American community. And in fact, when these Southern Italians made enough money to quit the mines, they built their stores, and the first place they built these little mom and pop grocery stores were in the African American area. The men that worked here deserve recognition, they deserve to be remembered. This was very hard, hot, dangerous work.
The original furnaces, the two original furnaces were built here in 1882 and 1883. And those two furnaces were basically copies of northern blast furnaces of the times, of the 1880s. And they didn't work very well with Birmingham ore because Birmingham ore has a lower iron content, higher phosphorus and silica and things like that, which would tear out the lining of the furnace much faster. So the real innovation here on the site was in the late 1920s when a guy named J.P. Dovell came out. He installed a series of cooling plates which circulated water throughout the furnace lining, the jacket. He invented gas washers which would basically take the off gas coming out of the furnace, wash it, clean it thoroughly, and then it could be used further along in the process to heat steam for the boilers or in the boilers for the rest of the process. Other things, for example, in 1895, a guy named Edward Ewing, who was working here at SLOSS, invented the first mechanical pig casting machine, which is basically a continuous chain of molds that goes in a circle, and molten iron is poured into those molds rather than having to stamp pig molds into a sand floor or a sand bed over and over and over, and you can get one good cast with that, and then you have to remake the molds. Rather than doing that, you had this endless chain of molds that were kept recycling, so you're able to increase production, you're able to make pig sizes more uniform. Yeah, the pig casting machine was never used here at SLOSS until 1931 when one was finally installed, and it was installed simply because they could no longer afford to run these two new furnaces. They basically couldn't run those in the old method with casting pigs into the floor. human labor could no longer keep up with production. Smelting is the process of reducing iron ore, which is iron and then rock. It's called ore gang. It's basically anything that's not iron. Birmingham iron for Red Mountain, for example, is about 30 or 40% iron. You have to get up to about 3,600 degrees to melt every bit of that iron ore completely. And that's going to separate. Once it separates, the iron is more dense than all of the rest of it, the waste materials. So the iron goes to the bottom, and those waste materials float on top. And then those bond with molten limestone, which is a flux that's introduced, and those form slag. Okay, so all the waste product is slag, and it floats on top of the iron. And that's the way you basically, all you're doing is reducing iron ore into its component parts. When it's running at 3,600 degrees, it takes about 4 hours to get somewhere around 70 to 100 tons of molten cast iron to come out of one of the furnaces here at the city. So in order to recycle as much of that heat and save all of that heat and all that energy, you just keep it continuously running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for up to, with these new furnaces and the new lining put in by Double, they could run for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years before they would actually have to be shut down to reline them.
Today, SLOSS Furnaces is the only one of the 52 furnaces that operate in Birmingham that still exists. It's no longer operational as an iron foundry, but it is operational as a tourist attraction and as a venue where you can bring your family and understand this industry and its contributions that your family and your great-grandparents made to this city and the creation of a new way of life. Birmingham, Alabama is a post-Civil War city created after the Civil War based on the iron and steel industry. During the war, they had found that all of the raw materials needed to make iron ore, coal, and limestone, all occurred geographically in the same formations in this area. When the railroads were built after the Civil War, they came together in what is now downtown Birmingham, giving industrialists a cheap and efficient way to ship the raw materials in and the finished products out. And so Henry Fairchild de Bartleben took the knowledge of the iron and steel industry and the raw materials, built the first furnace here in Birmingham, and within 10 years, James Withers Sloss founded SLOSS Furnaces. So by 1882, 10 years after the founding of the city, SLOSS Furnaces is built. And today, it's the only one of the 52 furnaces that operated in the Birmingham district that remains for the public to come and visit and to understand our history and the history of our great-grandparents.
What Bessemer did is he figured out that if you blew air through molten iron for long enough and at high enough pressure, what would happen is the excess carbon that is in the molten iron would attach to that air, and it would then blow out of the top of the converter. And so what you're left with after a time is steel. You know, of course, Southern industry was nearly non-existent prior to the Civil War, and it's with the advent or the founding of Birmingham in the early 1870s is really the first major industrial center to be founded in the South. By 1950, SLOSS Furnaces was the largest single producer of merchant pig iron in the world. You know, it's one thing to read about 3,000 degree furnaces or 2,800 degree molten iron. It's a wholly different idea, a wholly different thing to actually experience that firsthand, to be standing, you know, 4 feet away from a ladle full of molten iron. And it's something you just can't really experience through reading. You can't experience it secondhand. The one most important element for industrialization, for the Industrial Revolution to take place, was iron and the ability to release it from ore and then basically the ability to cast it into objects, into shapes, and then even to refine it into things like steel. If it weren't for iron, the Industrial Revolution would not have taken place.
We would put in the centerfold one of our new mixing ladles to ensure matchless uniformity. And again, just to reassure that all this new technology is going to provide you with even a better product. To kind of calm the fears of their customers about the mechanization that they were undergoing. They just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the pig iron that they were producing was actually going to be even better than before. SLOSS Furnaces is the only 20th century museum that speaks to this country's industrial heritage, and that's being preserved. And it's a place where you can come and actually see what it was like to work at a blast furnace, what it, to imagine what it must have looked like and sounded like and smelled like. But actually, when I think about it, that's rather sad that this is the only site, because really what made this country great and made it a world power is the industrialism, is the Industrial Revolution. Well, I hope everybody learned a little bit more about SLOSS furnaces, not only the technical elements of SLOSS, but the human elements, because there were a lot of different elements that made up SLOSS furnaces. And when you come out today, although it's very quiet, you can still get an idea of what it must have sounded like and what these men must have experienced working here on a daily basis.
In our future, we want to build a new visitor center to bring visitors to Birmingham and have them understand the importance of what we created here. It's the story of the creation of a new way of life, of a city that didn't exist, but within 30 years of its founding in 1872, was so proud of what it had accomplished that it sent this giant statue of Vulcan to the 1904 World's Fair. Think for a minute what it means for people in just 30 years to have such pride that they're willing to build that statue and send it to the entire world, and then realize that not one of those people involved in its creation was born or raised in Birmingham.
remember ever seeing a program like Art Visions. Art Visions is a program about human rights, and what better place for a program like this to originate from than the cradle of civil rights, which is Birmingham, Alabama. We should spread the message, and would go back and look at our history and say, look, this is Birmingham, Alabama, and this is what we struggled for: equal rights, equal justice. Art Visions is taking the lead in spreading that message throughout the state.
I'm Tom Wolf. I'm Director of Jazz Studies at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. The University of Alabama School of Music has over 300 music majors at the undergraduate level, master's and doctorate level altogether. The jazz program is an undergraduate degree with about 12 to 13 majors in there and then another 4 graduate students. It's a newer program. It's been in existence for the past 6 years. We have a lot of guest artists who come in and perform with my students. They learn how to improvise, how to arrange, how to perform in the jazz heritage style, and many of them go on to grad school or go on to perform in top name bands. And we're just very tickled to be here and excited to have this program here at the capstone of in the state of Alabama. We were here today to perform for the Collegiate Festival, part of the festival here at the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame, and we're very, very fortunate. We were named the Band of Distinction here at the collegiate level and walked away with a couple of soloist awards for Kevin Cowart and Tim Carroll in my band, and along with me here is Ernest Eccles, who is one of my graduate students, a fabulous arranger, a good trumpet player and pianist, and just very happy to be here and want to say thanks to Dr. Adams and everybody here at the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame.
I did my undergraduate there. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Alabama, and I was in his band, in Mr. Wolf's band, as an undergrad, and I wanted to come back and do my master's in jazz. To hear music, man, it's just great soloist, and have his leadership, just really, really cool. Everything's just real down to earth, and we get a lot accomplished. And today we walked away with a lot of awards. So thanks to Mr. Wolf, we're doing a very good job at the University of Alabama.
Don't live anywhere. I'm homeless for a year. Miss America is homeless. Every day, approximately 46 children are diagnosed with cancer. That's the equivalent of 2 school classrooms. And we aren't allocating the proper funding for cancer research. And this year, hopefully, I will be a spokesperson for one of the national pediatric cancer research groups. My platform launch will be next month. And I'm really looking forward to embarking on a national speaking tour and talking about this issue, educating people about it. Because again, like Miss America, people are misinformed. They don't realize how prevalent cancer is in children. That's something that I am also going to counter those misperceptions this year. And the license plate actually will be available, hopefully by the end of November, beginning of December. We've already raised, just in our 1-year free purchase time period, we raised about $85,000 for cancer research. And
our next performer, Paige Phillips Parnell, Miss Alabama 19.
Most of the cultural institutions that I've been associated with, museums or historical programs of one kind or another, suffer from a lack of advertising and public relations. People don't know what we do. People don't know how to access us. It's only through forums like Art Visions that we have the opportunity to get our word out to the public so that they have an opportunity to find out what we do, because we do not have, as nonprofits, the sort of advertising budgets that a for-profit tourist attraction would have. So a program like Art Vision is an important part of the community and the way in which the cultural and arts community can reach the public. And so I invite you to watch the show and learn more about SLOSS furnaces.
Creative visions and the respect for humanity. We need to understand that in the whole world around us, we do share a lot of common things. a lot more than we realize.